are listening to the Human Care Podcast, part of the Invisible, Not Broken podcast network. I'm your host, Eva Minkoff. This podcast features conversations with health entrepreneurs, care professionals, patient advocates, and industry changemakers. What do they all have in common? The mission to humanize healthcare. In every episode, we offer unique stories paired with education, actionable tips, tricks, and takeaways, all to help you better navigate healthcare and transform it into human care. Please note that this episode first went live on the original Invisible Not Broken podcast, which means that the interview likely took place long before this published date. If any dates or events are mentioned through the interview, they may have already passed, but be sure to enjoy the content and check out more up-to-date links in the show notes. Today's episode is about The View from Rock Bottom, which also happens to be the name of the book recently published by today's guest, Stephanie Tait. Stephanie is a disabled disability advocate who wasn't correctly diagnosed until 15 years into her chronic illness journey. She has Lyme disease and other co-infections, and as a result of the prolonged diagnosis, she has permanent heart damage, neurological damage, arthritis, and a variety of immune dysfunctions. Naturally, her story leads us to talking about changing the healthcare conversation, rallying the disabled voice, and if you've heard any of my previous episodes, not surprisingly, we both bond over being ex-ballerinas and the physical and emotional traumas that come with the professional dance world. Gotta love it. What's most remarkable about this episode is the truly unexpected curves of our conversation. For real, I had never spoken to Stephanie before this interview, and by the end, we both agreed that it was our favorite interview to date. In fact, we spoke for over 2 hours and easily could have gone for longer. Okay, let's get started. Like when it comes to trauma, very simplistic trauma, and I know that's something, well, we can talk about if you want to. I've had nightmares for the last decade about ballet. I've done work on it now, and so it's very, very infrequent for me to feel that way, but I still pay the price overall. And then I talk about, I don't have kids yet, but my husband and I, we want kids eventually. And I asked him, would it be okay if our kids danced? And he said, yeah, absolutely, but they're not doing ballet.
That's always the hardest question, is when someone says, okay, but if you had a daughter, would you let her do ballet? And it's so complex. Like, I think for me, the line is when they're little, probably yes, like, because there are so many good social skills, and it's not all bad for your body. In the beginning, ballet really did give me a lot of the skills to learn how to notice my body and what my body was doing, which is a good and important skill. I'm working on that now in trauma therapy, right? If anything, I have to relearn how to hear my body's signals. I think a lot of people with chronic illness struggle with that, right? Because you spend so much time trying to push through pain or push through nausea or push through fatigue to live a quote unquote normal life, that you almost train your brain to just stop listening to your body's signals, and you don't know how to do that well anymore. So there are good things to get out of ballet, but I don't know, I think my advice for most people is by the time they get middle school-ish, when it starts to taper off into something more serious, if anything, I would just introduce other kinds of dance. You know what I mean? Like, it's not take dance away, but I think it's really healthy at that point to say, if you want to get serious about ballet, then let's try a year of jazz, and let's try a year of tap, or let's try a year of something similar and see if what you really love here is dance or if it's ballet specifically, because ballet really is that one weird segment where a lot of that toxic culture is very specific to ballet. So I don't know, like, it's not a bad thing to expose little girls to ballet. I would be so wary so wary when it starts to get to that middle school, high school age, when you're already so self-conscious about your body and you're learning how to express yourself physically. And I don't know, I think ballet just made it really complicated at that point. I'm wary.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying I'd be like, no, you are banned from ballet. I don't care if it's the thing you love most in the world. Like, I'm not insane, but I I probably wouldn't go down that road unless they were really passionate about it.
yeah. I feel like there are a number of ways in which my mom, who was incredibly supportive, like through all of it, that she says she would have done differently. I don't blame her for a minute of it, of course. Um, Part of that might have been going to a different school. It was the best
Mm,
school where I grew up. It's a
that
very,
makes a difference too. It really does.
yeah. I mean, I became a really good ballet dancer, but obviously it had repercussions. And before I move from that, I do want to note that I think it's really good for boys for
Mhm.
multiple reasons.
Mhm.
First of all, to get all the attention. So it's the opposite.
They do. It's true.
The opposite. Uh, if and now I know that there's this, stigma around boys in ballet being homosexual. And look, a lot of them are, maybe because they're joined to it. My best friend, my best male friend, is a ballet dancer, not gay. And
Most of the men that I knew that did ballet seriously actually were
yeah,
not gay. There
I
were a
mean,
few, but a majority were straight.
yeah. And regardless, so if you are gay, one, you're in an environment where that is, unfortunately, I think being homosexual around the country is going to still be weird for a long time. I wish it wasn't. I grew up in New York. Like, so in New York, obviously, um so you're in an environment where that's not the case, and then if you're not, you are surrounded by women. But also, I think more importantly, having a man in a woman's world really pushes for respect around women.
Mhm.
um I think it was Balanchine. So I'm talking all about ballet here, but I
I
know
know, we
there's ways
totally didn't
to
even
relate.
plan this.
This is not planned. But I feel like there's so many ways to relate to actually chronic illness and ballet, and then
Mhm.
also ballet leading to chronic illness. Um, but yeah, even Balanchine said that something about ballet is all about the woman, and the woman is queen.
Hmm.
And so in weird ways, ballet has some very healthy perspectives. That is one of them that I tried to remember. Um, and yeah, feeling your body. I gotta say, as someone with a very well, chronic illnesses are always physical. They always manifest physically in some way or
Yeah.
other. Uh, I tried to explain to my husband, because he never saw me as a dancer, what I miss the most.
Hmm.
And other than performing, it was actually this sense of, maybe you can figure out a better way to say this, but feeling my body like do something grand, uh,
Mm.
even if it's stretching. So I love when I still stretch, which is probably not good for my hypermobility, but I love touching my toes and stuff. And when I run my hands up and down my legs, and I can feel like how, I guess, limber I am, and then lifting it. It's that whole, like you said, being aware of every part of your body.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I'm really aware of my body now, but not for good reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is.
I've gotten to a point where it's not so difficult for me to watch ballet, but I know that I will never be in a place where I can go down to like, your local community center and take a nice like exercise driven like adult ballet class that's, like the non-serious, like we're just a community group that gets together and we do a little bar work and a couple things across the floor. And I thought, okay, that might be nice for me. Get out, get when I need to move. I I can't because it doesn't I don't know how to say this without sounding horrible, but it doesn't even matter if I'm the best person in that room, right? Like if I'm very skilled for that room, I will always, always in my brain be comparing to those things that my body used to be capable of. And that will always feel frustrating for me. It will always feel like a loss. Like I'm not saying I will never take a dance class. It's not going to be ballet though, because you're right. Like you're so in touch with your body and you're so aware of like tiny little muscle groups, right? Like that you hardly even knew existed before. It gets to the point where somebody can come over and like literally stick a hand on some point on your arm and say, this needs to move. And you can just contract a muscle that you didn't even realize was there before. I can't do that anymore. And even if I can, my body won't necessarily go that direction anymore. And I don't think that'll ever stop just feeling heartbreaking. I don't think I'll get any joy out of like, well, at least I can kind of turn out. At least I have better turnout than those old ladies over there. Like that's not helpful to me. I'm just going to be comparing to what my body used to be able to do. So I just kind of avoid it entirely now.
I totally understand that. I can't actually remember if I said this on another podcast yet, but I'll say it anyway. Um, like a month or so ago, I actually did do that.
Hmm.
For the first time I did a few classes like 5 years ago, but otherwise I haven't really danced in close to a decade. Um, and I joined this new gym, and it was like the second day I was there, was wondering what classes were going on, because I do like classes because I have that performer streak in me, right? And I always go to the head, tell them I need to modify, blah blah blah. I walked past one of the studios and there was ballet that was about to start.
Mm.
It was like an extra class that clearly wasn't on the board. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like I was drawn to it, really like a moth to a flame. So
Yeah.
I walked in, especially because people are stretching, getting ready,
Oh.
hearing the music. It was like, it was like being in a dream/nightmare.
Mm.
But I live in Rochester, New York. Everyone's really nice up here. Like, and very supportive. Everyone there, I could see, like, I hate to say this, but I could see like they weren't really ballet dancers,
Right.
right? But the teacher looked legit, and I just went up and I said, "Can I join?" And I was wearing socks, which is not conducive, if
No.
anyone's wondering, especially on like a wooden floor that isn't like a
Oh.
marley floor, which is those rubbery ones. No, definitely not the right thing to do. But I started doing my pliés. I started to cry,
Mm.
and it was really intense. But again, it was that um, love, but the sadness and the memories. And long story short, it was actually a really lovely experience.
Mm.
But and I did well. And then of course people came up to me at the end. They're like, "Oh wow, you're really good." And I was like, and I thought the exact same thing you did, which is, yeah, but
Yeah. But you have no idea what good means to me.
right. Yeah. And it's not even compared to like other dancers out there. It's just, oh yeah, talk about turnout. For
Yeah.
everyone, turnout is when like, your feet go to the side rather than parallel in the front. And I'm in no man's land. I'm not really turned out. I'm not really parallel ever again.
Mm.
So no man's land. And yeah, these little muscle movements overall, I think it's important to talk about this because it's not just ballet. We're talking about the loss of the lives we used to have.
Yeah.
But the reason I want to talk about actually this class, or I want to just finish with this part, is I thought to myself, okay, what can I do to change this experience? How can
Hmm.
I make it a positive one? Because there is a side of me that loves ballet. And here I am in a class where there's not competition. It's very relaxed. It's at my gym. The teacher's very nice, but she actually is a very good teacher. Um, And so I decided, why don't I just focus on what I love about ballet? Like moving my body to the music and feeling like light and flowy, and not focusing on the pain in my body,
Hmm.
but the wonderful things that my body is still able to do. So I was like, whatever my turnout is, it is what it is. I'm not gonna put myself down for it. It does make certain moves difficult. There's a
Yeah.
reason why turnout's a thing. I am heavier now. There are difficulties because of my body, but I just decided to focus on what is working here. What can I do? What do I modify if I need to? And I've now taken four of them, four of
Oh,
these classes.
wow. Good
Yeah,
for you.
I'm yeah, I'm proud of myself for that. before I did the second class, my husband, my mother, and my mother-in-law all like sat me down as if I was about to get back together with my ex. Like seriously,
They had a ballet intervention.
seriously, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. But I'm hoping that that is a bit of wellspo for some people in that, look, we can't necessarily do what we used to do. And maybe there's a much greater divide for other people. Like maybe it's not, I can't do as well in a ballet class, but it's like, I can't get out of bed. Or, I know that for a lot of people, there's a totally different spectrum. But I think about, in regards to everything that we love, I think there are parts of everything that we love that we can still embody and experience, even if it is in a totally different format or environment. So I did not plan on going here, but
I did not either.
this is where it went. When two ballerinas get together,
Oh.
it happens. Yeah. So would you like to go back and talk about your story a bit? I tend
Yeah.
to start with, you have a long story. A lot of us have a lot to our story, right? It's whatever you want to talk about and whatever way in which you want to talk about it.
Okay. So for me, I mean, I was dancing and I was back in high school for me when not only was I dancing, but I was doing really well academically. I was pretty gifted and bright, had a lot of great plans for college and the future and what I wanted to do with my life. Kind of sky's the limit sort of stuff. And right about the middle of high school, some really weird things started happening. In the beginning, it was what we affectionately called breathing attacks because we had no other real word for it. 1 minute I would be fine, and the next minute I would be gasping for air, totally hyperventilating, feeling like I wasn't getting any oxygen from my breaths, which, of course, when you're pushing yourself physically with something like dance, that's a problem. It's a real big problem. So I saw a couple of doctors. They looked at asthma, didn't really fit. They gave me an inhaler anyways, like a rescue inhaler, because you don't want to leave me empty handed with nothing to do. But uh, the insinuation was sort of maybe this is more psychological than physical because we don't really see a reason for what's going on here. So we kind of just tried to power through and ignore it. But more weird, seemingly unrelated symptoms started to stack in. I was getting injured constantly, which, again, when you're dancing very seriously at that age, you just sort of write that off as, okay, my body's being pushed too hard, or I'm going through changes and my body's responding this way. But I started getting injured when I wasn't dancing or pushing my body. Like I'd be walking down the stairs and my knee would just give out. Like that's not normal. Uh, and then the fatigue was the real big one. I just started sleeping constantly. It got to the point where I would sleep 10, 11, 12, 13 hours a night and wake up in a complete fog feeling like I hadn't slept at all and I needed more rest. And my parents were a little bit concerned, to put it lightly, very frustrated. They went to doctors and said, what is going on here? And again, partially because of my age, because I was a teenager. And I really do believe partially because I was female. The comeback every time was, well, that just sounds like depression. I mean, have you tried Prozac? Have you tried, of course she doesn't want to get up and go to class. She's a teenager. Like that's just, she's being a depressive teenager. And there really wasn't anybody who was taking very seriously that there could be something physically wrong with me. My grades plummeted. I just could not keep up mentally with remembering what I had learned the previous day, let alone like sometimes it was, I would be reading something and I could read 4 or 5 lines and realize I don't, like I've already lost it. I have to go back and start over again because I can't remember what I just read 4 lines ago in this paragraph. And I could read it 4 or 5, 6 times before it clicked. This was not me. This was very unusual. I made it through high school, but barely. By that point, I, right around 18, 19, had to just pull back on dance. It wasn't going to happen. And for people that don't go through the whole ballet world, that's a very serious turning point age of like, are you serious about doing this professionally? Or is this more like, I want to be a ballet teacher? Like, you kind of need to figure this out because this is the age where you're either going to pick a path or it's going to be too late. You can't decide at 25, I want to be a professional dancer. It's too late. It's too late. So because of the timing, it was just sort of, okay, I guess that's it. Like, if I'm not in shape to do this now, I'm not going to do this professionally. I'm going to have to pick a different plan. So luckily I had been very bright and I thought, okay, then I will just buckle down. I'll go to college. I wanted to go into political science. I basically wanted to be Kirsten Powers for a living. I wanted to be a political analyst and go on shows and explain to everybody, well, this is what that really means. And here's what's happening. And partway through what little bit of college I did, I took a psychology class and fell head over heels in love, changed gears entirely and said, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a psych degree. I want to be a therapist, or I want to work with kids with autism, or I don't know, but I'm in love with this. But at the same time, the fatigue was still an ongoing problem. I started living in pretty much chronic daily pain. And so as much as I wanted to be excited about new possibilities, I just couldn't keep up with college. I would consistently start courses, be super invested, and like I was that kid who came in way over prepared and raised their hand for everything and everyone hated me. And within 6 weeks, I was behind and had too many absences and they were dropping me from the course. And this happened over and over and over. And I still didn't have an answer for what was wrong with me other than this is just in your head and you just need to power through it, right? Like mind over matter, you just need to choose to show up even though you're tired. And the more I pushed, the more symptoms started to come in that were not so easily written off as depression. I was 19 when I started having seizures. That was really the first time that doctors went, okay, well, that's a thing. Like, that's real. We can see that. You didn't like will yourself into having a seizure because you were super bummed out today. So they gave me medication for that and said I had epilepsy. Started getting sick all the time. And I finally had a doctor that was like, okay, well, maybe you have an autoimmune problem. Maybe it's lupus. They looked at that for a bit. They actually started treating me for lupus for a while, which when you find out what I actually have at the end of this and find out it's a real bacterial infection, when you treat something like lupus, you're essentially trying to shut your immune system down, right?
God.
Okay, yeah. So you put the dots together pretty quick there that the literal worst thing you can do to someone who has an active infection in their body is be like, why don't we suppress your immune system? So I got a lot worse and they went, oh, wait, nope, not lupus. Our bad, not lupus.
Our bad.
It's pretty much how doctors work. Like, we're going to try this. And then if you get worse, we're like, so it wasn't that. Our bad. Moving on now. Like, it just never happened. It's just part of the process. And you just have to accept that, which is so crazy to me. They looked at MS for a little bit, but I just didn't meet some of the criteria, even though I met others. I just got progressively worse. I had rheumatoid arthritis. They were talking about one of my hips. You'll probably need to get that replaced a lot younger than is normal because it's just going. I had problems with my hands. It took me a while to get the correct medical words for some of the things that were wrong with me because they felt weird or random in a way that I was like, I don't know how to describe this to a doctor without sounding insane. So I'm just going to keep some of this to myself right now. But I found out later that there are words for things like neuropathy, where I just don't necessarily feel the object in my hands. I can feel kind of the weight of the thing I'm holding, but I don't, like, my nerves just don't send that signal when I'm touching something, which makes me klutzy as all get out. It's hard to do
Woo!
things like chop or not spill your coffee down your chest when you're trying to tip your glass instead of use a straw. Like, those are hard things to explain to a doctor. And when you're already in a position where so many of them are treating you like you're just hysterical, this is in your head, maybe you just really like attention. There was the insinuation of, well, you did a lot of theater and a lot of dance and you're a nice looking little blonde girl. Nothing seems to be wrong with you. Is it possible you just really like the spotlight and you miss that? And this is how you're seeking that out now. the more you get that kind of feedback, the more you feel like you can't openly discuss your symptoms with your doctor unless you are 100% sure, like, this is what this is. And so I just sort of stopped asking for help for a bit and got sicker and sicker. And by the time I got to my 20s and I married my husband, uh, the miscarriages started. So I had, it's always interesting to talk about infertility because people assume that that means struggling to get pregnant. There are a lot of ways that you can experience infertility. And in my case, I had absolutely no trouble getting pregnant. If anything, I got pregnant a little too easily sometimes. The problem was I just couldn't carry these children to term. And so when you have a miscarriage and it's in the first trimester, doctors just sort of go, okay, well, these things happen. When you have another miscarriage that's in the first trimester, they go, well, there's some basic tests that we can look at to see if there's like a genetic component here, something obvious going on. And when those come back negative, it's sort of, again, these things happen sometimes. But I had 7 miscarriages to have my 2 children. And it gets frustrating when at that point you'd think there would be more of a, all right, there has to be some sort of cause. But every time it was just sort of, well, these things happen and better luck next time. I didn't really get anywhere with that angle either of approaching doctors and saying, doesn't this suggest that there's something here that we're not seeing? No, it's, women have miscarriages. That's what happens. So we did manage to have 2 amazing children. And I don't think that helped either. I think doctors sort of went, well, look, you have these kids. Like, then why do you just keep trying for more? Like, stop getting pregnant then. Like, if you keep having miscarriages, just look, you've got kids. Stop. Don't do that to yourself anymore then.
Did a doctor really say that to you?
Not in so many words, but it was very like, explain to me why you want another child so badly. Like, what is the driving force here? And you have these great kids and yeah. And it was less doctors at that point than people around me.
Mm-hmm.
I had one doctor in particular that questioned it, but people around me, they questioned it all the time. Like, I had one, oh man, asked me point blank, how do you think, this is between my 2 boys, asked me, how do you think this would make Aiden feel, my oldest? That, is he not enough? Like, you're just sort of ignoring the fact that you have this amazing, beautiful son and you're constantly pursuing this imaginary like second child and putting your family and yourself through hell. Shouldn't he be enough for you? And it's such a strange way to frame that to somebody, right? Like,
I
I
feel
don't
like
go to my friends that are married and have no children who are struggling with infertility and be like, is your husband not enough for you? Is that what you're telling him, that you don't love him enough because you want a baby? Like that, we would know that's inappropriate. Why would you say that to somebody about wanting more children? Like, we wanted more children because we wanted more children. I don't know why. When your family feels complete, and ours did not feel complete. We wanted a sibling, at least one. We wanted more, but it's not going to happen for Aiden. That should be reason enough. I shouldn't have to justify and explain why I'm worthy of fighting for more kids. It's just, anyways, it was a frustrating process. But throughout the whole thing, I felt like doctors weren't connecting any of the dots that weren't obviously connected, right? Like, there'd be somebody looking at seizures and there'd be somebody looking at miscarriages and there'd be somebody looking at pain and someone looking at fatigue and, my other doctor who handles the arthritis. And it wasn't that they didn't know about the other pieces. For reference, I've predominantly spent most of my time on insurance with Kaiser Permanente, and they've actually been really good for many years about sort of centralizing all of their information. Because when you have Kaiser, it's a little bit different from a lot of other insurance in that they are both your insurance company and the hospitals and the pharmacies and the doctors that you go to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are their own everything. So when you go to the doctor's office, it's a Kaiser doctor who's seeing you, which has its own pros and cons. But one of the good things about that is you don't have, your cardiologist that's with some practice over here who doesn't talk to your neurologist because they're with a different company entirely down the road. That's not a thing with Kaiser. They all see each other's notes. It's all centralized. So it's not that they didn't have the tools to put the dots together. They just, it's almost like they were unwilling to see any of this as connected. It was just, you just have a lot of crazy things that happen to you. And I don't know, like, I don't know why they wouldn't go, well, I laugh, but when you talk to people who have never experienced chronic illness, many of them think that this is like the show House, which drives me nuts because they all picture that there's like a team that's like, oh, wait, she has seizures too? Oh, well, then you combine that with the miscarriage and you get this because this is this other. They don't do that, you guys. Like, that's not a thing. There are not entire departments at hospitals that are sitting around trying to figure out why people like me are sick. They don't do that. They look at the most obvious explanations, and if all of those tests come up negative, especially if you're a woman, it's, well, what do you want us to do? You seem fine. Try antidepressants, get some therapy. Maybe you're making yourself sick. And this went on for 15 years of my life until I got to the point where I was so sick that I was pretty much in bed 4 to 5 days a week, raising 2 kids. The seizures were somewhat well controlled with medication, but never fully controlled. My fatigue was just out of control. I had nonstop pain, anxiety. I was in the emergency room 4, 5, 6 times a year with illnesses that were out of control. But I had also started to develop really advanced symptoms of my particular condition. I had a tremor that would happen very often in my hands. I had a really bad aphasia. I couldn't access my words anymore. Very simple words that were very basic, like hat, would just disappear, and I couldn't speak clearly. And I had some heart problems all of a sudden. And again, it was, well, you must have had some sort of infection in your heart, and you had this pericarditis this one time, and we can see that on a test, so you're not faking that. And maybe it left some damage, and that would explain some of the issues with your heart. And it's all unrelated once again. It's like they just started throwing darts at a board of like, maybe you have 20 rare conditions all at once that have nothing to do with each other. That seems logical. And I finally hit my limit. I finally got to the point where I said, I can't keep doing this. It's almost like, I think for many of us who are chronically ill, you go through sort of the stages of grief, if you will. And I had gotten to the point of acceptance in a way of sort of, this is just my life. It's just going to be like this. There is no answer. They're never going to have an answer. Maybe I really am just crazy. Maybe I really do have 12 random things at once. And I don't know what started the cycle over for me, but it was like I got to the point where I couldn't live in acceptance anymore. And I was willing to just sort of jump off the cliff and go all the way back to start and risk going through all of that cycle again if it meant maybe, just maybe, there was an answer here that they had missed. And I started fighting really hard to get new tests for new things. I started looking at all kinds of crazy options. And what's hard with insurance is when your doctor and your insurance company are the same company, you know immediately if you're going to get approved for certain tests or not. And many of the times I would go in armed with all of my information and say, I fit the profile for this or that, and I'd like this test. And they would go, no, we're not doing that. If you want that test, you can pay for it yourself, but we're not doing that. And one of those tests was the initial test for Lyme disease. I knew somebody whose daughter was quite a bit younger than me, but had started to go through very similar stages to what I went through. And in her case, they were able to figure out relatively quickly that it was Lyme. And she got treatment, and she was like a different person. Her life completely changed. And I thought, well, that's something we never looked at. It's worth a try. Let's just get the initial test. And to be tested for Lyme disease is a 2-step test. And if you get the correct kind of positive on the first test, then they do the follow-up one. And I went to my doctor with this information, and my doctor said, and I quote, well, Lyme is just the diagnosis du jour. Everybody thinks they have Lyme. And it was like, okay, I don't really care what other people think. Like, here's my case and all of my information. I fit the criteria really specifically. Can we at least just get the test? And my insurance said no. So fine. I'm convinced enough that there might be something here that, yeah, we'll pay for it out of pocket. Can you just do that test? So we paid for it out of pocket and they did the first step of the test. And I asked my doctor, okay, like where are we at? And she told me it's dead end. It's nothing there. I was very surprised and thought, okay, well, it's another thing we ruled out. Moving on. And it wasn't until a few weeks later when I was looking at a totally different possible condition that I said, can I get the results from all those tests that we've done so far? And I'm just going to put them in my file, like so I can keep track of things. Because at this point, I was talking to any doctor that would talk to me, like, help me look at my case and see if there's something here you see. So I get the results actually in front of me of the Lyme test that had been done. And it was very strange. Because there on the form was the listed range for what was standard, like in numbers. And then next to that was the number of where I came back, and it was higher than the listed range for what was standard. And I said, okay, maybe I'm just dumb and I'm not reading this correctly, but doesn't this say that it came back positive then? Because it's not in the negative range. So what does that make it? And my doctor says, oh, well, you're right. It's not negative, but it's not positive either. Yeah, that was my face. I was like, okay, wait. So there's no and there's yes. And
There's
what else is there? I'm very confused right now. So they proceed to explain to me that when they do medical tests like this, they have invented, as I will just label it, they invented this. They have come up with a third range, which they call equivocal, which is their fancy way for saying it's not negative, but it's not positive enough for us to actually want to pursue this and have to pay for any follow-up stuff. So we're just going to put you in no man's land of maybe yes, maybe no. It just, we don't know. And what frustrated me was, okay, but Lyme is a two-step testing process, okay? So if I was outside the negative range on the first test, and you're even admitting to me that that puts me in maybe yes, maybe no, wouldn't the logical thing to do be to do the second test then that's more specific, that's going to give us a clear answer? And once again, my insurance said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And this time, they didn't even really give me the option to pay for it out of pocket. It was simply, we ourselves, we're not going to do that. And so I thought I had hit a dead end. And luckily, I had been doing enough research on Lyme, thanks to my friend of a friend. And I knew that there was a company called Agenix that specializes in testing for Lyme. It's a private lab, and you can pay them to do it, and it has nothing to do with your insurance. So we pulled the money together and started from scratch and did both steps of the Lyme test through Igenix. And the thing about talking about Lyme for people that are familiar with the disease is there are a lot of people who believe that they have Lyme who don't have what the CDC would consider a positive test. Okay. And I am not one of those people who's going to go out there and go, and those people are nuts and they don't know what they're talking. It's fully possible that many of them do have Lyme. The testing is notoriously inaccurate. It's so inaccurate that a number of states on the East Coast where Lyme is really prevalent have enacted laws that say if you get a Lyme test, your doctor has to give you a piece of paper with it that actually says, if this test comes back negative, it doesn't mean you don't have Lyme. That's how inaccurate the testing is. So I'm not going to discount those people's stories, but I want to be super clear. I'm not one of those people. When I got my lab results back, I have what the CDC considers a positive Lyme result. And I brought that back to my doctor and said, look, it's Lyme. And they said, but we didn't do this test. So how can we actually know that you have Lyme? Because for all we know, like you could have sent them anybody's blood, or they could have tested the wrong blood, or like we don't even know how this lab does their tests. And we would need a positive result from us. And so I said, fine, then let's do the test. And once again, they said, we did that first test. We consider that a negative. You don't qualify for that test. And I thought very seriously about fighting that, but I had done enough research into Lyme and the Lyme community and my insurance to know it wouldn't have mattered anyways, because all they were going to be willing to do was say, here's 30 days of antibiotics at tops, at absolute tops. And then once you take those pills orally, you should be fine. Everything's all better now. Because unfortunately, there is an enormous debate about whether chronic Lyme or late stage Lyme is even a thing. And so, because of the way insurance companies work, this is not a problem with my insurance company. This is every single one of them in this country and even in other countries. Canada has similar issues. The UK has similar issues. If there's any way, any little loophole that they can dive into to say, we don't have to pay for this, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. So if there's a debate about whether your condition is even real, I mean, that's not just a loophole. That is like a giant barn door flung open to say, we don't pay for those things ever, 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 ever. So even if I had fought them on it, they weren't going to cover any of the treatment that I needed anyways. They were going to throw a couple of weeks of oral antibiotics at me and say, you should be fine now. So we went outside my insurance company and we started investigating who reputable, which is really hard, but reputable Lyme physicians were. Because again, once you are pushed outside the normal medical system, man, it's the Wild West out there. Because if you're not getting your treatment primarily from your usual physician, I mean, anybody can jump in and claim they have a cure for Lyme. There are people that will tell you what essential oils to take for Lyme. I mean, it's nuts out there. There are, I will not say that it's all good medicine. There are quacks out there who people swear up and down have cured their Lyme. And it's really hard to sort through and find out who's who. But we did our digging and we went to a trusted friend who had seen their Lyme improve, and we raised a ton of financial support from friends and family because it was excruciatingly expensive and we could not afford it. And we threw ourselves into treating Lyme. And I won't say that I'm like all better. That's totally unrealistic standard, but I have seen enormous improvement. My tremor comes and goes. It's fairly rare. It's more so in the winter, but and when I don't sleep. But it's not a constant thing anymore. I still struggle a lot with chronic fatigue, not anywhere near as badly as I used to. I'll be very honest and say that's also in part, oh boy, this is a risk saying this one too publicly, but I also found a really sympathetic doctor who looked at the research I brought him from Europe and recognized that in patients like me with chronic fatigue that is likely to never go away, antidepressants don't do squat. But you know what does help? Stimulants. So even though this is a risk, he is prescribing me Adderall off label to help with the inability to get up out of bed. And nothing has changed my life more than being on a stimulant. Nothing at all. But I did a lot of months of intensive Lyme treatment and my arthritis improved, my memory improved. Some things will probably never improve because when you leave a bacteria to run rampant in your system for 15 years, like there's damage that you can't just reverse. I will probably never fix the heart damage that I have, for example. There are certain neurological symptoms that are never going to go away because when you lose those parts of your brain, they don't just regrow. Like your brain literally has to reallocate how it uses the space in the brain, and that's the best you can do. So there's some things that are never going to get better, and I've had to learn to live with that. That I will live as a disabled person for the rest of my life because for 15 years, nobody was willing to put the dots together. And more than that, most of them weren't even willing to believe me that something was wrong, that this wasn't all in my head. And when I think about that too hard, I still get very angry. I still get very angry sometimes at feeling like I don't know how many years of my life were just completely robbed from me, robbed from my children, how many of my children were robbed from me because nobody was willing to take me seriously and really work on finding a solution instead of just telling me, well, it's not this. So, okay, fine. It's not that thing that you tested for. Great, rule that out. But what is it then? And I never got that follow up part. I basically had doctors that I think the number one bottom line for them was if we don't know what it is, then it isn't. Then it's just in your head. It's just you. If we can't tell you what it is, it's probably nothing. I never had one that said, if I don't know what it is, that's on me. That's my problem. I need to keep looking then. That's not you. You're not crazy. I just don't know what's wrong with you. And I need to work on that. And we can keep working on that together. But I never got that. So I don't know what life would potentially look like for me if it hadn't been 15 years, if it had been 1 year or 2 years, or I don't know. And I probably will never know. But that's sort of how I got to where I am today. That was a lot. That was a lot.
Well, you took us on a journey that, first of all, thank you for taking us on that journey. And what I couldn't help but think during all of it is how all of our journeys are obviously different, and we all experience them differently. But at the same time, we all relate to what you're saying.
Hmm.
And I mean, even myself, and um, especially early on in the story, like that was my story, definitely. And it's a cruel reality that everything that you said is not abnormal for us.
No.
It's and the feeling for me, not being recognized as being, well, it being real, my experience being real, and then actually insinuating that I'm lying. It's
Mm-hmm.
like not even recognizing that it's not real, but then it goes back to, well, you must be crazy or making it up or lying. Like, and I also, dancer, performer. I was a bit of a dramatic teenager, but it was unrelated because I
Yeah.
liked being the I can do anything girl.
Yeah.
And that's what I tried to tell people around me. I was like, look, fibro is not, like, being fatigued and not being able to do things is not how I plan on getting attention. Not
Well,
my,
and that's such a gendered reaction, by the way, this
oh yeah.
idea of like women are so hysterical and so illogical that apparently they're also so stupid that they can't think of a better way to get attention than to subject themselves to repeated painful medical tests, right? Like what woman is like, I haven't had attention from a man lately, so I'm going to let him jam a needle in my spine and do a spinal tap that I don't need because that just sounds like the best option for me to get attention. I can't think of a better plan than that. Let's do that. Like, that doesn't even make sense, right? But to think that women are just capable of that because we're so histrionic, that is the most chauvinistic, sexist piece of garbage. And yet we hear it from doctors all the time because you're right. This isn't unusual. This is what's so different about talking about these things with someone else who's in the chronic illness community is when you share this story outside to most able-bodied folks, they're like, wow, that's shocking. 15 years. Oh my gosh. And not one of them. I mean, you should sue somebody because that's just what a crazy, unusual story. And you tell this story to someone who's disabled or chronically ill, and they're like, yeah, I know like 12 people who had the same thing happen. I've
That
had other people that are like 15 years. Man, I know someone that spent 30 years. Like, that's nothing. Like, I know someone that it's not unusual. This happens all the time. All the time.
there wouldn't be people listening to this podcast or making
No.
all the in these groups and all these rallies. All of this exists because we are a real population of people, and a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you actually do the math, it's about 100 million people in America. That's a third of America, and that's, by the way, with these more quote unquote rare chronic illnesses. There's 157 million now with chronic illnesses overall, but I'm talking like autoimmune, genetic, chronic pain, fibro related stuff. Like 100 million of us. There is 100 million of us. This is not small. There's a reason why hashtag Spoonie, there's like 2 million hashtags being used of Spoonie, just
Yep.
Spoonie. So, thanks to Spoon Theory, um, yeah, it's so incredible that we're a population that's overlooked and underserved because it's such a large one in a westernized culture. It's not even like we're in, you know, India. That's a weird thing to say, but you know what I mean? It's like
I understand what you mean.
we're a people who have the ability to really speak out, and we have resources to make things known, and education, and still somehow this exists. But I love that it is coming to the forefront. Like there is this conversation happening, and you're part of that conversation.
I
Which
think what's frustrating though is that like you'd think then the more of these illnesses that sort of like fibro is actually a really great example in that years ago, even when was first like talking to my doctors on this Lyme journey, there was still the sort of the medical opinion back then was that fibromyalgia wasn't even real, right? Like it was the diagnosis du jour. Everyone and their mother has fibromyalgia because they're a little sore and achy and like it's all in your head. You're just depressed. Depression can cause pain and that's all this is. And I'm not going to pretend that it's that like fibromyalgia has arrived and that like everyone accepts it and they understand it and you are not there yet. But as far as the medical community is concerned, there are medications that are designed specifically for fibromyalgia because they've moved from this is not real to, okay, we may not fully understand this very well yet, but it's real. Like it is an actual condition. And we all acknowledge that in the medical community. It is a thing. Now, they may not necessarily get it right with each patient. They may not believe you have fibromyalgia, but they know it's a thing. And that's happened with a number of conditions that used to be considered all in your head. And we know now, okay, that's a thing. Or there's genetic markers that they discover now and they go, oh, okay, that causes a problem that we didn't know about before. You would think if that's happened over and over and over, that you'd see some kind of turning point where they recognize we don't know everything yet. So these people over here that keep coming back and we still don't have answers for them, isn't it very possible that there are new diagnoses that we haven't discovered? They're part of that group of we just don't know what is causing your problem yet. Unfortunately, I don't see any sign of that happening. I don't see any significant movement in the medical community to move towards a model that says just because our tests all come back negative doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with you. Because so many times they say, oh, that's not a thing, or you're fine. And they found out later there was a condition they didn't know about. You'd think there would be a movement then to say, all right, there are probably a lot of things that we don't know about yet. Good Lord, you go back 100 years and you tell people that they're going to be able to test your DNA and tell you how likely you are to get certain kinds of cancer. They would have thought you were nuts. There's so much we don't understand about the body. And yet it's very much presented like, no, this is all very black and white stuff. There are tests for everything. And if they come back negative, you're not sick. And I don't understand why we're still so attached to a system that wants to act like any of this is that black and white when we've seen so many examples of how not true that is. I don't know. I don't know why. I feel like doctors care more about what they can test for empirically on a piece of paper than the symptoms that you're describing to them, right? Like if we can't do a test for it, is probably that doesn't count like in our diagnoses, right? Like you can describe pain, you can describe fatigue and like, okay, like that's interesting. But when we're really sitting down to figure out what's wrong with you, like we're going to test this in your blood and that in your blood. And those are the facts. Everything else is just kind of, the patient said they experienced this and that may or may not be related. And I don't know why we can't move towards a system that's more holistic, not saying like, let's go out into the wild west of, you know, there is no medicine, just sniff these oils and use these magnets and everyone will be fine. That's not what I'm saying. But isn't there a balance somewhere between everything just needs to be what we can test for in your blood? And no, we need to sit down and have conversations with patients in which they describe their symptom and their symptom history. And we say, those are facts just as much as things we can look for in your blood. Those matter just as much as how you score on a lab test. And if we don't put those two pieces together, we're not really considering every possibility of what's wrong with you. Because I know for Lyme patients specifically, like I said, many of them will never get what the CDC considers a positive blood test. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And some of them are very scientific. I mean, to put it as basically as I can, the Lyme bacteria is literally shaped like a corkscrew. It's called a spear shot, and it literally burrows into your tissue. So if you're testing your blood, right, you may or may not get blood that has that bacteria actively moving around in it. That bacteria may all be hanging out in a chunk of tissue. The best way to test for that is an autopsy. Like, it's literally to check your tissue. So that's, A1 is you don't necessarily find the blood that has the bacteria in it at that time. But bigger than that, the current test for Lyme doesn't even test for Lyme. It tests for your immune system's reaction to Lyme.
Oh.
Meaning, there are about 80 different reasons I can think of right now why you might get a negative test, but you still have Lyme. You are immunocompromised from some other condition. You test too early and your immune system's not responding yet. You test too late because sometimes your immune system has been fighting something for so long that it goes, oh, maybe this is like allergies, right? Like, oh, that's not a germ after all, our bad. We just won't do that anymore. There's like so many reasons you could get a negative test. And yet, medicine still works this way of, well, what can we test for? And if all those tests come back negative, forget the fact that I have a whole person in front of me who's describing symptoms, who's literally presenting evidence to me. I'm just going to ignore that and go, but the piece of paper says no, so you're fine. We're never going to be able to correctly diagnose things like Lyme right now if we're not taking the approach of listening to patients who know their bodies better than anybody else and saying, I believe you, that's a symptom, that's evidence, that counts. We're going to put that down on this form that you are so tired you are in bed 4 days a week. That counts for something. I just don't see it happening right now, though. I don't see any significant change. Like, we are having these conversations, and the chronic illness community, thanks to the internet, is so united and outspoken now in a way that I just couldn't have imagined back when I first got sick. Like, it's amazing to see, but I just don't see the medical community significantly responding enough yet at all. And that's what's frustrating for me is, yeah, we are here and we are talking about it. It's great. But if they're not willing to respond, if they're not willing to hear what we're saying and go, okay, well, then how can we change the way we do medicine? Sometimes I feel like we're screaming at a wall. Like, it's great to be acknowledged that this is happening to us and that sucks, but it's not enough to acknowledge that this is happening to us. You have to do something about it. You have to admit that the system's not working the way it is, and we have to change that. And I just don't see that happening yet. I don't, and it's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
There's a concept I've been playing with in particular this week, actually. So it's interesting that you bring it up. I say we as in people who like aren't politicians, like the average person. Not that we can't change the healthcare system, but it's obviously very hard for us to change the healthcare system. So what is it we can do? What us as the people, what can we do? Anybody from bed, on the street, what can we do? And my feeling, and I might not articulate this well enough because I really want to develop my thoughts around this, but we can encourage the conversation and on both sides. Because like you're saying, what you think would change all of this, and I'm sure we all feel this way, is like if they actually listened and engaged us and believed us. Now, the one insight that at least I know I have is I do know the medical community, both from holistic to very standard. I say this all the time on the podcast. My husband is a pediatric gastroenterologist in fellowship. So he is in it. He is in the system. He doesn't even, other than obviously diagnoses, he doesn't get to really have anything to play with in terms of opinions and whatnot. He's in boot camp.
Yeah.
And I love talking to him because I want to know what that's like. I
Hmm.
want to know what it's like on the other side. And I talk to all of his and my doctor friends. And then I talk to the more holistically minded doctors. And I like seeing all the different perspectives and where is a common denominator. And then also where are all the issues and where can we like connect all of the dots. And I truly feel that relationships is the answer to that.
Hmm.
The problem being that we don't see eye to eye. So to put it blank, like be straightforward, and these are just examples, this isn't true for everyone. So we are like, you're not listening to me, you don't believe me. And then from a doctor's perspective, nice or not, like I'm not talking about anything about their character, just from being a doctor, it's like I'm not allowed to do anything if there isn't
Hmm.
proof. So it doesn't matter what I think, I'm not allowed to do this. If I give you a hint that what you're saying is true, but I can't do anything, that puts me at risk with your health because I'm responsible.
Yeah.
And there's legalities around that. Um, Money, when it comes to tests, doctors are actually, this is what a lot of people don't know, doctors are discouraged to spend money and make you and spend money. It's a lot of
Absolutely.
people think it's just a money making machine. In many ways, it absolutely is. Do not get me wrong. Pharmaceuticals, good Lord. Um, but they're actually supposed to bring down costs in the right ways. I'm not saying it is right. Obviously, we have some major issues with
No,
tests,
I get what you mean. Yeah.
but and then there's so it's this, and then at the same time, doctors have to create some kind of a wall. They don't always know what kind of wall to create in order to be able to deal with so many sick people all the time.
Yeah.
Husband, one of the most compassionate people, if not the most compassionate person I've ever met, who loves kids and is a pediatrician. He's got to put something up where he's going to crack every day, every moment of every day. But what
Mm,
kind of a wall are they putting up?
mm.
And so I see that there needs to be more of a push for a human relationship. But just like other human relationships, you don't have to. I'm an empath, right? So like you don't have to be an empath to the point where you're like, I just took all of that in. Like
Right.
you can build a transparent wall. I don't know. There so like I said, I haven't formulated these thoughts well enough, but that's like my personal mission for our
Yeah.
community is that on both sides, that doctors can open their eyes to how to change the conversation, even in a 7-minute visit where it's all about insurance and all about money. How can you still connect with someone and make them feel heard, even if it's saying, I'm sorry, I don't know. I understand that you're going through something difficult and that you're being honest with me. I don't have the answer. Maybe I
Mhm.
can point you in the direction of someone. I'm really hoping this is where Wellacopia, my business, can also help. But beyond that, it's just how can both of us, the doctors and the patients, get on the same level, even though we come from very different or seemingly different backgrounds or points of reference. I don't think that's impossible at all. And the healthcare system could stay the same. It could change. In our country, it loves to change.
Mhm.
So I think it might be the right idea for us to think about how can we make this better while ignoring what's going out, all the noise on the outside.
Yeah.
What can we do as patients and be recognized as people again?
Mm.
Sorry, that was my little gospel right there.
No, it was good. It was a
It
very good
was
gospel.
good. I just been
You
thinking.
made me feel like a little bit hopeful, I admit. Like I there's hope in the idea of how can we foster conversations not just within the chronic illness community, right? But and not just so that we increase awareness about us and our existence to, people who are not chronically ill, but specifically across that bridge to the medical community as a back and forth, where you're right. It's not, and I should say that I don't hate doctors, right? Like, I don't even hate all of my doctors. I've had doctors that are really compassionate people, but you're right. The system is designed in a way that sometimes they're held back from being able to provide any level of care that's bigger than what they're already doing. That's it. They've already pushed the limits of what they're allowed to do. I love the idea of how can we target these conversations more specifically to build bridges between medical voices and those who are chronically ill and disabled, not just raise awareness, but say, okay, like, we're the two camps here that have to find solutions together. So what does that even look like? And I don't know. I'm sort of with you a little bit on, like, I don't actually know what that looks like, but I don't know. It made me feel very hopeful, the idea of just even having those kinds of targeted conversations. What that could do is amazing.
I
There's a limit on that.
Yeah, and I am going to work more towards that. I mean, it was always part of my mission, or I guess it was always my mission with Wellacopia. We match people based on compatibility, not just diagnosis and medical degree or something like that.
Yeah.
But I want it to be more of a community than a matching platform. And I don't mean a community as in like a Facebook group kind of community.
Right.
A sense of, this is a community where we're trying to find the right people to be partners with, because we're actually a partner as well as them being our partner. It is a partnership. It's also why I base it off of a dating site. It's built just like a dating site because we're just people.
Yeah.
It's a relationship. That's what it's supposed to be. And actually going back to getting us sort of all in the same room, I actually did do that for kind of our launch. It was like a silent launch party of Wellacopia. I called it the Care Fair, that I actually did with Allie Cashel, who has chronic Lyme. She was also on the podcast about this. And the Care Fair, I know it's like a little bit of a silly name, but it was about celebrating self-care on both sides. And it was an event with practitioners and patients.
Ooh.
And it was wonderful. It was really wonderful being open, like having these conversations from both sides with these people in a room. And it was 100 people, like it was a decent size, but I want that to happen on a grand scale. And I want to have more of these care fairs. And but it was just like our first test of how can we wrap all this up together? How can we get everyone literally in the same room having this conversation? And it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. So I am glad that is instills a little bit of hope. We can talk about it further and we'll like rally up in a different way. And there's already some people have been talking about this with pretty extensively. This one woman who will be on the podcast, I'm going to mess this up, but she said something about regaining or her persona. This is going to be really embarrassing given that she will be on the podcast later on, but something about bringing back her identity as a person and basically demanding that of doctors, but in a nice way. Like, ask me how I'm doing. Let's have like a conversation, even if it's a quick one. We're people. Let's talk. Not just like, I see your chart says. Yes, how are you today?
I think the other aspect that I'm most interested in these days is there are a lot of conversations happening around healthcare in the context of insurance and what that system looks like going forward. But it's difficult when we're not sort of centering voices of people who are chronically ill and disabled, right? Like, there's so many people that just want to talk about healthcare insurance and how we get it politically in this country and what the system looks like going forward. And they're talking about the ideals of what that system should or shouldn't look like. And there are so many times I'm listening to the conversation and I'm like, I can see how all of that makes sense to you, But like your impression of how the system even works right now and the kind of care that you get from your doctor has to do with the fact that you see your doctor in a very limited set of contexts, right? Like you go for very traditional, like I go for my well check and I get my regular pap smear and I do this. And when you're someone that gets repeated ongoing care, when you need things that are a little more complex, the system looks very different. And so, as much as it's very important, and I don't want to downplay how important that we continue to look at the best way to provide access to healthcare, I don't think we can have that conversation accurately or fairly unless we're willing to look at how people are experiencing the system that we have it right now. And what I mean is, for instance, like I am in many ways a huge proponent of socialized medicine. I'm not gonna lie. My husband's Canadian, so there's that.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's difficult for me sometimes to participate in conversations about things like Medicare for all because on the one hand, I want everybody to have healthcare and not have to pay an enormous premium. Right now, my insurance premium is almost comparable to my mortgage. It's killing us. It's absolutely killing us. I'm gonna get emotional. I cannot tell you how many times we have thought we were gonna lose our house, or it kills us, and every year it goes up. So yeah, I'd like to see an end to that for sure. But I think the part we don't always notice or talk about is the idea of simply saying, okay, well, then we're just going to get everybody on Medicare and that's going to fix that. You're all going to have free insurance tomorrow. Great. Try talking to some people who are disabled and chronically ill and are on Medicare right now. Because there's some very complex and there's some very diverse opinions on the quality of care that they're currently receiving. And if we're not willing to have real hard conversations about, okay, but what's not working about Medicare at the moment? It's easy to just compartmentalize this and say, well, as long as we got everybody access to health insurance now and they don't have to pay for it, the system's fixed. Hooray. Not necessarily, no. Because as much as I want to lose my almost $2,000 a month insurance premium, if I'm brutally honest, the reason I'm paying that premium right now is because I chose an insurance company that is offering a quality of care that works for me. If you told me right now that tomorrow they were going to take away all the rules about income qualifications and anybody that wanted to get on Medicare could just ditch their insurance and go get on Medicare tomorrow, I'm going to be brutally honest, I wouldn't do it. Not necessarily. It would be a very difficult decision. I'm not sure I would do that. But it's hard to have that conversation when it feels like sometimes we're not all working with the same terms. We're not all having the same conversation, if you will. And so when you start to bring up those criticisms, you hear, oh, so like you just want to keep going with private insurance. No, I'm not saying let's just keep the system we have. I'm saying if we don't start to not just occasionally bring in for diversity points a disabled or chronically ill person, if we don't start to center these voices who are, man, you want people that can give you an accurate representation of healthcare? How about we bring in the people that are interacting with their doctors on a darn near weekly basis, who don't just see them once or twice a year to get some new vaccinations, but who really can bring together a more holistic approach of this is what it looks like to get care in this country. If we're not willing to do that first, I'm very scared that any change that happens in the system might inevitably put us even further off the mark for quality care for people like us. Because when we make a good change in some ways, I think it has a tendency to get people who aren't, I don't want to say recipients, but who aren't affected, right? Like the way we are, when you're outside of it, it's easy to go, look, we did a good thing. So now we don't have to think about that anymore. Like we fixed it. Just give it time. We fixed it. You just don't get it yet. Like, trust me, it'll catch up to you. You'll understand later that what we did was really, really good. Just hang out. And then we can all sit around and congratulate ourselves and think we fixed it for them. I'm scared that if we don't find a way to communicate the ways the system is failing us right now, outside of just the cost of insurance, the actual quality of the care itself, that these proposed solutions might accidentally make things worse And people might not notice it because they're just going to be so excited about the access that they've provided for everybody else. And that's hard because, again, I am a huge proponent. Like, I want some kind of a Medicare for all system. I do, but not as it exists right now. I don't. That's not good enough. And I'm really afraid that if we don't start being more intentional in the way that we say that and point that out, and if we don't start getting more vocal about it, all people are going to hear is, well, you guys want to make sure that you're not bankrupted by your insurance. Great. We gave you that. Moving on. And that it's almost sort of a, like, if we're going to change things and do this huge, enormous change, we need to get it all in there and get it right. You know what I mean? And not just change this one component and then the conversation moves on to something else and we've missed the window to really holistically change the system. So if we're not, like I said, we're not centering the voices of the people that are going to be using the care the most, I'm very concerned that we'll inevitably make it worse, even though it seems like a great way to make it better.
Yeah, I guess the conversation's really around, as you said, access. So it is, a lot of the country maybe doesn't have access financially, but then those who need it most are those that are like us. And actually that can be regardless of financial stability or like instability. I mean, I know that you alluded to, or at least being brought up in a family where you were very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And same with me. And it's like, well, mine was awkward because I was brought up in a household where both my parents are in corporate America and getting healthcare was not a problem. But then I was thrown into an awkward world where I was on Medicaid because I was sick, wasn't able to, really have a career like I wanted. Turns out I wanted to be an entrepreneur anyway. So I was quote unquote out of work, even though I've been doing this for a long time. So I
Yeah.
was eligible for Medicaid before I got married. And I was like, this is awesome because I can't afford healthcare. I also got very lucky in that I lived in an area in New York City where there happened to be a lot of doctors who took Medicaid. Um, but I think there was only one doctor I actually saw relatively often, and I hated her. Like, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I did have a choice, and there are options now that I wasn't aware of that, even though more expensive, I would have made work. But yeah, I kept thinking to myself, like, it's a good thing that I'm pretty stable right now.
Mm.
Like, I need this doctor, but I'm okay. She's giving me the medication I need. I'm finding other ways to do like therapies that I need. But I really had to craft it. And I felt so weird. I was like, I'm really, really lucky right now. I have access to this doctor and medication. I don't have to pay for it. I'm in New York City, which makes me lucky on another level. And yet I was like, I deserve so much more. And I do. I am absolutely entitled to that. But then it's comparing to what other people are experiencing, right?
Mm.
It's just all so, it's all so messed up. It
And
is.
I think
Absolutely.
it's hard because sometimes it gets presented as like, well, which of these two crappy choices is less crappy? And like, we improved things, so aren't you grateful that we improved things? Because again, do not get me wrong, I am not okay with the solution being, well, if you wouldn't want to be on Medicare, then we're not going to do Medicare for all. We're going to just keep the current system and hopefully someday we'll get the price down. Like, that's not a solution to me here either. Like, I do want to find a way to get out of the insane system we are currently in. I do. I just want to make sure that we're not saying that's good enough then. Like, that's it. That's the only goal is, well, now you don't pay for your insurance anymore. The end. Like, you go, well, if anything, I think it's that sometimes people think that's what we're talking about. Let me explain. Like, I think when you say something like Medicare for all, people are like, oh, so you'd have exactly the same care that you have right now. You just wouldn't pay for it anymore. And isn't that great? Not necessarily. Like, if that's what we're talking about, we need to be very clear that that's the specific goal here, that you could have the same care you're getting right now, but how do we drop out the insane $2,000 premium? Saying, let's just institute Medicare for all tomorrow is actually a very different thing. It's saying, let's put everybody on a system that currently exists right now that tells you these are the doctors that we cover. This is the care that we cover. This is the cost associated with that. And I am, again, a proponent of something like that plan. I am. And it's not going to sound like it because I wouldn't necessarily want to sign up for that tomorrow, because access is the most important thing, but it's not the only thing. Access matters, but there has to be a quality of care behind that access that's consistent. And as it exists right now, the quality of care isn't consistent across different insurance companies, across different tiers of your insurance plan. So if we're not being careful in the way that we frame these conversations, that gets missed by a lot of able-bodied folks who don't use their insurance very often, who don't visit their doctors very regularly, who think, oh, well, I might not see Dr. Jones anymore. I might get moved over here to this person. But that's not that big of a change to them. There are way bigger things to consider in quality of access than I have to drive an extra 5 minutes to this other doctor now. But you may not know that if you're not somebody who's consistently using their care. And so I can't stress enough that, like, all I want to see is it's not enough to just sort of decide I'm either pro socialized medicine or I'm pro private medicine, and that's it. Like, that's the conversation. That's not enough. It's not enough to let politicians sit around and debate this and talk about it, or advocates even. It doesn't make sense, and it's not a complete conversation unless chronic illness and disabled voices are there to help form whatever this new system is and what it looks like going forward. Because at the end of the day, we're just going to see things that you might not even notice or know about or know are an issue. If we're not there in the planning stages, I just see so many ways that this could go south. So many ways that well-meaning advocates have a tendency to think, oh, if I was chronically ill, I would want this, that, the other way. You don't know. You don't know what it's like until you're here. And you don't know which needs in your care. Like, if you sat down with your insurance providers, like the forms they send out each year for your plan, and they're like, this is what we cover and these are what the costs are. And I think many folks don't even really look at all of that beyond what's my basic like copay or what's my basic percentage of for a normal visit. I go through those every year with a fine-tooth comb because I have to look at certain tests, certain lab things, certain stays, and say, if these sort of lower down the paper things have dramatically changed in what cost comes on me as compared to my doctor, other people may not notice. I notice. I will actually have to choose a different plan if certain things shift, certain things that other people might not even ever need from their insurance company. It's stuff like this that we have to start considering. It's not just enough to say, we want everyone to have access to insurance. Sure, we all agree on that. We do. But what kind of care are they going to get with that insurance? Because unless we're answering that question and doing it in specific detail, like I said, I'm somebody who's desperate to get rid of my premium. It's killing my family. It's killing my family. I would do just about anything to get rid of it tomorrow. And yet I know, like I said, if they say, great, we'll put you on Medicare right now tomorrow, I can't promise you I would do that. I'm actually really hesitant to even lean more towards doing it than not. That's how serious it is to get to part B of this conversation, which is what's the quality of care behind that access? And if it means everybody has to take a giant step down in order to get rid of the insurance premium, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. That may work for, your typical healthy American. That's not going to work for people who are dependent on that care every single day of their lives. It's not. That's not going to be good enough for us. And any sort of plan that's like, well, let's tackle the big stuff first. Let's get the access thing taken care of, and then we'll give it some time to work the kinks out of the system. And then as these things come up, we'll address them in subsequent bills. And again, for people who would depend on that care every single day, that's not going to work. Like, there is no breaking in period where I can afford to have crappy care for 6 months and just hope that it all works out in the end. There are people who, are dependent on medications to save their life that can't go, oh, well, until they come up with some sort of like Medicare Part B type thing again, I'll just figure that we can't do that. Like, if we're going to make a dramatic change, we have to get it right from the beginning and not, oh, well, that's sort of a subsequent conversation. We can figure out those details later. As long as everyone gets insurance, that's the most important thing. It's just not good enough. It's not. The quality of care matters here. And I don't know how to help reframe some of those conversations without sounding like I don't want Medicare for all. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as you go down this road, it's like, well, you don't sound very supportive of socialized medicine. You sound like you like your insurance company a whole lot, Stephanie. I don't. I don't have any special affection for Kaiser. Right now, they're the lesser of all the evils for me. Yay for them. Like, that's not a high bar. I,
Yeah.
I don't want to stay with them because I love them, but I also don't want to lose the quality of care that I've become accustomed to. And I don't know how to find that balance in this conversation of, yes, I want to lose my premium, but not if it means the quality of my care has to tank in order for me to do it.
And then on top of it all, if you want to go out of the system altogether, which in many respect might be the best thing to do, we don't know enough about what's right for us in that environment either. Because I'm very pro all kinds of care, all legitimate kinds of care, and but we still go in the dark, right? You said in the Wild West.
Yeah.
Wild West is a great place to be, but it can also be very scary.
Don't get me wrong. I said like sniffing oils and Magnus, all this stuff, but in reality, like, if you could see behind this sound booth, I have an entire wall of essential oils behind the sound booth, right? Like, I'm not anti holistic care. I just know that there are a lot of really unfortunate quacks that are out there that are preying on people like us who don't necessarily get the care they need from the mainstream medical community, and they see dollar signs attached to that right away. Because if there's no way to be 100% sure that something is legit, that just opens the door for so many people to be like, just trust me on this. Western medicine doesn't want you to know about my magic water, because it would just, man, the pharmaceutical companies would hate it if you learned about my magic water. So please buy my magic water and it will cure you. There's so much of that out there. So I hope I didn't come off like only Western medicine has the answers and everything else is quackery. Like, it's just a tough balance of, there is a lot of quackery out there. It's hard. Yeah. They target us.
It's hard. It's hard is the poster for this for our lives. But I want to, while I very much enjoy is not really the right word, but I am comforted by conversations like this because it shows we can pinpoint what are the real issues, and it's also good to relate to one another. I am a positive person, and I try in every chance possible to think, well, what can we do?
Yeah.
Even if it's really, really tiny, even if it's just ourselves, what can we do maybe in our little communities? This is where social media, I think, is great. You know, social media is also one of those things you can love, hate social media, but it does bring a lot of us together. Like, what can we do right now? And based on what we were talking about before, and also I'll just actually say based on something else you said, you were talking about like rallying the disabled voices, which I obviously agree with, but yelling at another party works to an extent, and it can, but it's hostile. It's going at change from a negative angle. And look, I'm not trying to be all hugs and butterflies and whatever. That's a weird way to say that. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
I knew what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rainbows and butterflies. Is that what people say?
It's not fluffy.
It's not
You're not saying it all has to be fluffy.
It not all has to be fluffy, but again, it's like when you're yelling at someone, what's someone's first reaction is they're going to yell back. And doctors and even politicians and all the other people involved in healthcare, they have things that they could yell back at us. Like, as we just said, we're giving you access to care. Come
Yeah.
on. Like, that was really hard for us to do.
Yeah.
And look, they have valid reasons for doing what they do and saying what they have to say. Look, and we can say good and bad on both sides. And so when I think about how do we move forward, well, we absolutely need to speak up. No doubt about that. It's like, how should we be speaking up?
Hmm.
We can
And in a way that we're heard, right? That there's not an immediate defense to, well, that was nutty and aggressive and wow, like I'm not interested in hearing any more of that. How do we speak in a way that fosters like an ongoing conversation?
yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually, I mean, this is a relationship too, of like two parties having a relationship rather than like you're wrong, no, you're wrong. And I'm just now thinking in terms of philosophy of like life and all relationships. There's a bajillion analogies for this too, but that's my opinion. And maybe it's a bit too optimistic, but my feeling is always go towards the most optimistic, most positive thing. Maybe it
Mm.
won't be that, but if you're working in that direction, then maybe you'll get close. You're on the way. Um,
I don't think you should be in any way embarrassed of like that optimism, because I do think the hardest part when you're doing activism work is that propensity towards cynicism, right? That it almost becomes just one big trauma bonding club. Like, let's all just sit and rehash the horrible things that have happened to us. And because of the way the brain works, right? The more you retell that trauma, the more your brain actually just replays it and the more inflamed that gets for you. And more than that, if you're an empath or you're an empathetic person, then you listen to someone else's trauma and you take that on and then you're angry and more upset. And so there is a propensity in activism towards cynicism, towards this all sucks. It's terrible. We're all going to talk about how terrible it is. End of meeting. The end. Like, that's it. It's really hard to find that balance. And we need voices like yours that say, yes, this is wrong, but where can we go from here? What would a positive change look like? Because it's not enough to say we need change, we need change. Like, if we're not volunteering some kind of vision of where to go, like, we're just going to keep aimlessly hopping from new system to new system to new system, and every one of them is going to have problems because we didn't think this plan through. If we're not willing to like carve out that intentional space for hope and for some form of optimism, whatever that looks like for us, we're not going in any direction. We're just sitting around reliving the same trauma over and over again. So I don't think you should be embarrassed or like feel like, oh, maybe I'm too optimistic, or like, oh, maybe that's too cutesy. And like, I think we need more people like that. I think it's easy to get sucked down the cynicism hole and just focus on everything that's wrong with the system. Again, don't get me wrong. I am not saying let's tone police everything and make it so that it's just really comfortable for the pharmaceutical companies and doctors to hear us better. Like, I get it. There are problems. Raise your voice, be out there. You can, be an activist on the front line saying this is not okay. There's absolutely space for that. I just love that you're trying to find that balance of how do we recognize those voices and still say, where could we go? How could we do this better? What does it look like to cooperatively come up with solutions instead of just burning it all down? Where do we go from here? What does it look like? I for one, appreciate that you can do that. I have a hard time. Sometimes I feel pulled more towards the cynicism side. It's hard to remember that the goal here is better care, right? It's not just that we make these people pay the price. It's not just we get them to acknowledge what they've done to us. Like, these are not the goals. The goal is better care. The goal is that people's needs are met. The goal is that everybody comes out of this happier and healthier and more holistically, I don't know good word for that. It's just, I appreciate that you keep the focus on forward and not just how crappy things are that are behind us.
I don't believe in regret.
Hmm.
I believe in reflection. Uh, I've even done a lot of things in my life that I am not happy about. Um, I do not regret them. I just think to myself, well, what can be done now? And I try to think about that outside of myself too. What
Mm.
can be done now? And overall, I just think about I really do think it's good to take yourself as an example, or even just individuals as an example, and then project what that would look like on a grand scale. So I
Hmm.
think to myself, when something's not going well in a relationship that I'm having, like there is a disconnect. We are not seeing eye to eye, and there's just no way to get past it. You got to take a step back and actually look at that other person. And it's the look at what is it, take a walk in their shoes. That's one way to look at it. But just, they're human, just like I'm human. Doctors and patients, they are human. That's a human that is having human feelings right now, human experiences. How can I relate to them? I might not be a doctor, I might not know the rules, I might not know the money situation, whatever, but they're trying to, let's just say there's a doctor here that is trying to do the best they can in this scenario.
Yeah.
They're trying to do the best they can. And I do know a lot of doctors that I can see doing that. I'm like, maybe you're doing the best you can, and I don't think you're doing it the right way, but you're trying. Like their
Yeah.
intentions are good. And other than like sociopaths, most people's intentions are good. Again, rose-colored glasses here, but really, like humans are human. We are just human, and all of those, even those assholes out there in the White House and stuff, we're all look, I don't really want to give them any credit, but we're all human.
Yeah.
So I really can't say that enough. And I hope that um, that resonates with you and other people listening, that anytime you have trouble getting through to any person, just remember that they're human, you're human, and connecting, knowing that both of you are human, is a great place to start.
I think that's why it's so powerful when you have shows like this, where you bring people on to predominantly to share their story, right? Because if there's anything that humanizes these conversations and reminds us that this is not just some political debate, this is not a bunch of people having a broad philosophical conversation about systems of government and how we deliver insurance. Like, these are human people with really diverse stories. And part of the kind of like, because I typically write theology more than anything else, I don't have a seminary background, right? Like, I didn't go to seminary and get the degree that's typically associated with doing this work. And there are a lot of people like me who did it, because what we found is that the most powerful way to communicate to people what this has to do with us, like why even sit around and have conversations about how we think God is, or who we think God is, or what we think he's like. It's all pointless unless we're relating this to what this has to do with us as people, right? How do we treat each other? What do we owe our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? For people from a Christian tradition, it's this idea of, I carry the image of God in me and you carry the image of God in you. And no matter how upset I get with you or what you might say or what you might do, we both carry that image of God. And that means that we each deserve a certain amount of respect from the other person and a certain amount of admiration for that image of God. I love that shows like this are so good at pointing back to that same humanity, right? Of each one of these stories is a person who's experiencing this in a very real and tangible human way. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a big picture debate. This is a person who's dealt with illness, who's dealt with the system, and what has that looked like for them? I wish we could do more of this. I wish we could find a way to take this and apply it to so many more contexts. I wish I don't necessarily want to watch a news program that's all just human interest, like fluff stories as they do it now. But you know what I mean? Like, I wish we could find a way to really see the humanity, or for people from that Christian context, to see the image of God in people and say, that's really special and valuable and important. And I want to respect and honor that rather than just sort of throw a bunch of random facts at people and turn these people, our neighbors, each other, into debate fodder, right? We're just anecdotal evidence in a debate to further prove my point of whatever I was already going to say to begin with, regardless of whatever you said. I had just already decided this is how it was going to be, and this is what I think, and I'm just going to grab the right stories that sort of feed into that. I wish we could find a way to do more of this, to have people just sit down and say, I don't necessarily have an agenda. I don't know where this conversation's going to go. Maybe we'll go on a 20-minute tangent about ballet. Who knows? But we're just going to share stories, because the more we learn about other people, like the more we realize how much we owe each other and how interconnected we are and how much we belong to each other. And it's not enough to just hope and pray that everything works out well. You get invested, right, in your neighbors. You start to see their humanity. You start to see that image of God and say, I need to take care of that. I need to protect and honor that. Like, how do I help give you the best life possible? Not just me, not just my kids, my household, my immediate. How do I make sure that you and you and you and you over there, how do all of us as a community have the best quality of life possible? How can we really belong to each other? So I think you've made something amazing here. I love what you're doing. And I wish we could do more of this in more contexts. I think it's important.
We can.
There you are with your hopeful optimism again. What are you doing to me?
It's one of those days that I was feeling pretty drained too. Woo. Well, we could clearly keep talking forever and ever. But
I'm very quiet. I don't like to talk. I'm an introvert, very shy.
yeah, we're not
Not super opinionated.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. And we didn't even really cover a lot of things I wanted to cover.
I'm sorry.
So we got, but I will be letting everyone know about what you've accomplished and what you've turned all of what you've been talking about into, to promote a better world for us. Really, I know that's overall sounds grand because that's what it is. You have become a monumental component of what we're trying to do. Everything that we're talking about, you are an optimistic person.
I'm trying. It doesn't come naturally to me anymore. I think it used to. I think that's a component of trauma brain, right? When you have PTSD, it's not just being triggered by the specific bad things that have happened to you. It's this overall feeling of the constant sensation of waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Because when you've had enough horrific things happen to you, your brain starts to go, well, that's what we should expect. So we should look for danger around every single corner. I think over time, optimism's just gotten a lot harder for me. So it's really makes me a little bit emotional, you would say, that you still see it there and that you still see it in my work, because I'm trying. That's a very intentional choice to try to cultivate. In fact, small tangent, but when I wrote my book, I turned in an outline. When you write nonfiction, you don't write the whole book ahead of time, right? You sell them a proposal. It's just an outline of what the book could be. And then you write it with their guidance. And so I sold them an 8-chapter outline, and it was I'm going to rebuke these horrible prosperity gospel ideas in the world. You can pray your illnesses away, and we're going to do this better. We're going to talk about grief and suffering and pain, and we're going to have a really healthy conversation about those things. And I got to the end of writing and I went, it needs one more chapter. And so I added a 9th chapter, and they let me keep it. And the whole chapter is just on, but how do we balance all of this with this idea of hope? Where is there room for hope in all of this in the end? Because if I just sell another book that claims I have all the answers for why bad things happen in the world, and instead of having it all be, it's all part of a grand plan, I swing to the other side of cynicism and say, because it's all horrible, I have not done anybody any favors. I haven't helped. I just polarized the conversation even further. And so I wrote an entire chapter that was basically just very personal stories of me trying to walk this out right now. And it's like the most convoluted chapter of, here's a story of me at a church service where people are going up and praying for healing. And I'm like, this is garbage. That's not a thing. And I go up and I ask for healing and I don't get it. And it's this crazy story of like, why would you even tell us that? Because it's important that we keep fighting for some shred of hope. Because if we've already let go of that, what are we even fighting for anymore, right? Like, you could give me the best quality of care tomorrow, but if I haven't held on to reasons why this life is worth living, then why am I fighting so hard to save my life? Why? If I can't find joy and purpose and hope in my life right now as it exists, as a chronically ill and disabled person, if I can't find reasons to live now, we are kidding ourselves if we think those are all suddenly going to appear when everything works out, right? If I got a cure tomorrow and I was just miraculously healed, it's delusional to think that I would suddenly develop practices of joy or hope because everything's going right in my life. That's not how it works. I think it's great that you consistently keep pointing your conversations back to, and it's hope. It's not optimism to me. It's hope. That's worth fighting for. Hope has teeth, right? Like, optimism sounds so fluffy, and hope is, man, it's not unicorns and rainbows or like cute mantras on a pillow. Hope has teeth. Hope is like, we have lost the last 14 battles in a row and we are bloody and we are wounded and we are showing up again anyways, because who knows, maybe we will win this time. Let's see. You are like such a hopeful person, and I appreciate that. And I'm trying to cultivate that. I am. It's just like we said 80,000 times. It's hard. It's hard to do.
I am definitely going to change the words I use, and I'm going to change it to hope rather than optimism. I love this hope has teeth thing. I'm going to make a drawing later. All right. We do have to wrap up, but man, I feel
that's not at all how either of us saw this going.
No. I want to, like,
we're both like wiped out. We're both like no spoons days. We both were like, I don't even know. My brain's not functional. So we'll just see what happens. That was not what I was expecting to come out.
I have a lot of spoons now.
I don't. So I'm going to go watch TV because that just, woo.
It's like different kind of spoons. It's like, I want to go lay and not do anything, but I also feel like energized. I feel that hope. I'm talking to you. It really, I'm all jazz. I'm going to do jazz fingers right now.
Not ballet fingers, jazz fingers.
Oh, spirit fingers. Please. Sorry. If anyone gets that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. Like, it means a lot to me. I love the work you're doing. I think it's really important. Please keep it up. Please keep it up.
Thanks, Stephanie. And you as well. Absolutely. An enormous pleasure. The Human Care Podcast is part of the Invisible Not Broken podcast network, a network that includes several chronic illness, disability, and health-related podcasts, including Explicitly Sick, hosted by Monica Michelle, Discomfort Zone, hosted by Jason Herderick, and of course, the original Invisible Not Broken podcast. We absolutely love feedback. Love, 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 love feedback. And connecting with you one-on-one or within our Invisible Not Broken podcast community. So please reach out to us anytime. We're open to topics, critique, you name it. This is a podcast created by us for you. You can find information about all of our network podcasts, community, and how to contact us all on invisiblenotbroken.com. You can also find us on social media platforms through the handle Invisible Not Broken and humancare_podcast. That's it, everyone. Thanks for listening and being a part of our mission to transform healthcare into human care.